I had never played the original Halo up until a few months ago. Well, more specifically, I played the remaster via the anniversary edition on Xbox 360. And that is what we're watching here. But prior to this, I had never played the original Halo. In fact, Halo 3 was my introduction into the franchise. And I remember, back then during the sixth generation, I only had a PlayStation 2, and I wasn't so heavily involved in the gaming community. And I know that in terms of the internet, like YouTube, everything that we're so accustomed to these days with, sharing game footage on YouTube and this whole community, and it's very much a common thing that people go on the internet, discuss games, share their gameplay. The stuff that you're watching now wasn't so widely spread back in the early 2000s. And so your involvement and knowledge of the gaming community, yes, there was some stuff on the internet, of course, but magazines and articles and stuff, printed actual materials that you would buy at a bookstore or subscribe to. I remember being subscribed to Edge magazine as well as PlayStation magazine, and you had to, back then, games came on discs. Back when you bought those magazines, they would give you demos to a bunch of upcoming games via a disc, and so you would put that disc in your console and be able to play some of these current games or short demos of games, maybe stuff that was pre-released and not even out yet. That was a common thing. This is before we had like the PlayStation Store. Microsoft's Xbox was a little bit more forward thinking in that it was a little bit more integrated with online connectivity, and Halo was really the birth of that, right? It was really, this game is what really gave Xbox the identity and made it a force to be reckoned with, going up against the conglomerates that were Nintendo and Sony at the time. And so this game has a very distinctive history, I'm aware of, but not one that I was very much involved in at all back when that game came out. I wasn't really concerned about it. I didn't really care much to know much about the game or really read up upon it, because I didn't have an Xbox and I wasn't really interested in anything other than my PlayStation 2. So playing this game now with how different I am, and now I'm a lot more well versed, I would say, in the many different facets of gaming. I own all the consoles, and I participate in and purchase games on a wide variety of systems and play all the exclusives and go to the E3 conventions and stuff. It's very interesting, because I get to play this game, although for the first time all these years later, with now an understanding of the importance and the subject matter, and really kind of get an idea of just why this game is so important to many people and why it was so significant back when it came out. I have to say that when I first booted up Halo Combat Evolved, the remaster here, what really surprised me was this game's level design. The reason is that I was not aware that Halo took such a forward-thinking approach to its gameplay by essentially allowing you to explore and go about missions in this open space. This game isn't open world by any means, but it sets you off in a level, and these levels are vast. They're actually pretty large and do hold up well today, and you're basically given a set of objectives as well as side objectives, and you're allowed to sort of go at them at your own pace and decide to explore or just go straight to your story objectives. This game has a really interesting pace to it because I was playing it thinking that this is going to be a linear first-person shooter, but what I got out of it was more of this game about the journey. You got this really interesting world that the game was constructing, right? That it was like the birth of this new science fiction saga. And it sets up the world in such a way, and the characters as well, in such a way where you feel the camaraderie between them. And Master Chief, for all intents and purposes, is more or less like a brute, right? A special soldier, but there's a personality behind him, even though he's a faceless character. Usually what you would see in this type of game of this type of era are characters that don't really have a personality, or are kind of just voiceless. They're just part of the narrative. But in this case, the game gives Master Chief an identity and personality, even though you never see his face, and that's always been the rule of this franchise. That still does come across. And so looking at it through the lens of what was done back during the time that it came out and the time that it was new, this was a game that I think was on the cutting edge of what games would be providing us in the future. And I think what many games are still trying to catch up today. We see a lot of trends these days in modern gaming when specifically looked at when it comes to level design and an open-ended player approach. Every game wants to be the open world sandbox shooter these days. And we've seen a lot of franchises that are previously linear now have gone full open world. Some of this was in response to players demanding more content out of their games, but ultimately the content that we got, although more plentiful and much more widespread, I would say, than the original games, are arguably less of quality. They're not that interesting. The stories have gotten a lot worse. The pacing of games is something that has been suffering immensely throughout the many years. And ultimately, what we have at the end of the day is an experience that takes you about 3 times as long, but you don't remember any of it. Halo is a game that I can see immediately when playing it why it was such a phenomenon. And it's interesting to look at it today because it's ingrained in our pop culture. Like, everyone's familiar with it. Back then, this was all brand new. And it's very, very apparent why when you start playing this game, and again, looking at it through the lens back when it came out, why that was the case. I really enjoyed the fact that it allowed you to sort of explore, and you could approach things from different angles, but your limited scope of combat was always the same. You're always going to be shooting, right? This game isn't sort of a more sandbox style approach where stealth is involved or anything like that, and I don't expect Halo Infinite will ever introduce that sort of element to the gameplay, right? But it's the fact that this world feels like one cohesive playground, which is really impressive because you're playing on this giant ring, the Halo ring, and you look up and you see, the ring kind of tilt forward and then go all the way around you. You can see like the edges of the world pretty much when you're looking at this, and it's quite a sight to behold, I have to say. It's something that's very, very, very interesting, and it just creates this sense of wonder, right? That when you're playing this game, it's like, wow, this is something really, really cool. This is something that I want to know more about, a world that I actually really want to be a part of. That is the feeling that Halo Combat Evolved gave me. On top of that, I have to say that even when it comes to the artificial intelligence in the game, while today's standards, they basically sit there and shoot you, and I would say they behave more typical to the Halo combat style that we've all grown accustomed to, right? We've seen like marginally better artificial intelligence and reactions and stuff, but what really kind of struck me is, again, you have to look through it at the lens that this is a 20-year-old game. The AI feels so grounded in the world. I love the reactions of the little grunts when you kill the brutes, right? Because as soon as you kill their leader, they all go scrambling. They have zero idea what to do, and they know basically that it's over for them. When you throw grenades, and I have to say I got very frustrated at this, but just because it took a very sensible approach to the reactions of the artificial intelligence. When you throw grenades, you have the enemies dive out of the way, and so ultimately I had to like strategically learn how to use grenades, because you can't just throw grenades into a group of enemies and hope that, okay, it's gonna explode. If they're aware of your presence and they see the grenade incoming, they're going to dodge and run out of the way. And oftentimes I found myself wasting grenades just by throwing them at enemies who were aware of my presence, like dead center, and they jump out of the way and they'd be perfectly fine. It's just a very, very, very forward-thinking game, and it's interesting because by today's standards, Halo hasn't changed so significantly. I think even the newer Halo games, while they tighten up the gameplay, right, the core of how Halo played and felt has always sort of been the same. And it's the same thing with this first game. And I think that's in a way, why people are so sort of nonchalant about the series now, because we've all sort of been there and done that. And a lot of people who are growing up with Halo today may have not had that experience of playing it back when it was brand new, or may not even be interested in going back and playing the original games. But to have some sort of frame of reference of just how technically impressive and, again, forward thinking that this game is, you really have to understand the era of when it came out. And, on a visual style, I'll touch upon this briefly just because this is the anniversary edition that released on Xbox 360, which I do know was controversial in that the art direction kind of changed dramatically. I know they went for a more artistic, colorful approach, and a lot of people who are fans of this franchise didn't really care for the cartoony nature of the world in the way that it was, redone or remastered. You can still play the original visuals, via the select button. That's always been like the staple of these anniversary editions, is that you can switch between the two engines. So you can still do that with this game. And it is mighty impressive, this sort of switch between both of them, and to see such a big difference, I guess, in visuals, and more so in Halo 2 when I actually talk about the anniversary edition of that game especially. But in terms of even the original game, stuff looked fairly flat, but the Xbox at the time was like a supercharged PC almost in the console space. And coming from both the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube, which one was held back by, it coming out a year earlier than all those consoles, and the power, wasn't really as powerful as the weakest of all the consoles, didn't even have an HD output at the time. And then you have the GameCube, which was kind of held back by its storage media, and the Xbox was sitting here giving you 720p and 1080i interlaced resolutions back in the early 2000s, enhanced definition when it was called that. So it's just interesting to kind of, if you know about the architecture there and sort of what the system was capable of, what we have here is a game that takes advantage, not so much I would say on terms of its graphical prowess and its beauty, but more so on its level design and in other areas like the AI especially, which to me, even though we've seen this 1,000 times with modern games today that have necessarily caught up and even exceeded far beyond this, to see such reactionary elements out of artificial intelligence back, again in 2001 is just crazy to me. And the enemies, sit there and they are tough to kill. They do bounce around, and it's just a really good time. So I actually really liked Halo Combat Evolved. I was, again, more impressed with what this game just did with its open-ended design. So I really enjoyed Halo Combat Evolved, at least the Anniversary Edition. I do plan to go back at some point and play the original game on the original Xbox, just because I would like to see, at least, how that game really kind of performs, I guess. And it's still running technically on the same engine in the Anniversary Edition, but I would like to see playing with like an original Xbox controller, like the Duke design, how this game felt on a console of that era with a controller of that era. That's something I'd be really interested in seeing. So that's something I do want to do in the future. But as a way to actually introduce me to the narrative and really see how it birthed this incredible sci-fi world that we've all come to know today, it's been very, very interesting, and I quite enjoyed this. So Halo Combat Evolved really gave me a newfound respect for the franchise, more so than I ever had. And again, playing it with that frame of reference of when it came out, keeping that in mind, I think it's just, you really got to give credit for where it's due. So I very much enjoyed this. For any of you who are sort of hardcore Halo fans, if you played this game back when it was new, I'd like to hear from you why this game was so special to you, or maybe you didn't like it, and that's something I'd be interested in hearing, is if you played this game back when it was relevant, what didn't you like about the game, if there was anything. And maybe you haven't played the other Halos, or maybe you just were never really into the franchise, but this to me was quite a trip down memory lane, at least in terms of the time period. And again, to see such a big jump with artificial intelligence and level design, especially when you keep in mind that this was the generation after the original PlayStation and N64. It's quite crazy to me just how significant that jump was. And man, it makes you excited to see where games is going to be going next. I think this generation that we're in is just getting started. And so thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk with you all later. Thanks.